Hello, everyone. We're here today with our good friend and spiritual brother from the land down under, Frank Poniris. And Frank has just received some interesting news, and we wanted to talk about it because it reflects very much on the current state and mentality of the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses. So, Frank, why don't you just give us a brief overview of what's happened to you recently?
Right. Yes. If just in case no one knows what's happened, for the last 4 or 5 weeks ago, I was receiving phone calls from 2 elders, and they were calling me to wanting to chat. And then from that discussions, which I never actually answered the phone, I just let it ring through, and they left messages saying this. Then one afternoon while I was asleep, I had 2 elders knock on my door, and my daughter, she came to my room and said, "Daddy, someone's at the door." So I went there, and there was 2 elders there, confronted by 2 elders standing there.
Mm-hmm.
And I was, confused. I didn't know, I wasn't expecting anybody really, but especially 2 elders. Bear in mind, I haven't been to meetings for years. So all of a sudden, they're at my door. And they then initiated a conversation, which I asked them to just sort of leave. And then one of the elders said in reply, "Are you knocking back an invitation to a meeting?" or something like that, or to those effects. I can't remember exactly what he said.
Mm.
And I just said, "Look, I just want to go back to bed. I was sleeping, and I just want to go back to bed." So I shut the door. And then they sent me some mail. Sorry, Eric, they sent me some mail.
Right.
One was unregistered and one was registered.
Okay.
And I just returned to sender.
Right.
And so that was the last I heard from them. In the meantime, I organised a gardener who's a Jehovah's Witness, one of Jehovah's Witnesses, to come and cut my grass.
Just to be clear, did you open those letters?
No, I didn't open those letters at all.
Okay.
All I did was return to sender. I put it back in the mail and send it off.
So I know.
I just figured that.
So then they had knowledge then that you had received the envelope but had not opened it and therefore would not know what was inside.
Exactly right.
Okay.
Exactly right. I then just went about my normal business. I was expecting someone to come and cut my grass at home, and he hadn't come. It'd been over a week, and I sent him another text message saying, "Hey, can you come and cut my grass?" Basically.
Yeah.
He returned the text message saying, "Frank, you are disfellowshipped," and that was the first time I heard of anything.
Wow.
That I was fellowship. So it was totally by surprise. I wasn't really expecting that. I was expecting some sort of, I don't know, maybe another response from them. I was expecting more in a sense that they would try and talk to me, or at least make more effort to get me to a position where I understood what was going on. Because actually, I don't know.
Yeah.
Technically, I don't know what's going on.
Right. So now the reason we're bringing this out is because it shows the extent to which they are willing to not bend, but break their own rules. So these aren't even rules from the Bible. These are organization rules, which often are more important than Bible rules, and they'll break them as well. It's because according to the shepherding book, they have to inform you of a meeting. And if the letter was returned unopened, then they could not know that you were informed. But they could just as easily have given you a telephone call and said, "Listen, Frank, we schedule a meeting for such and such a time, such and such a day. Can you come?" That's what they did with me. They called me and scheduled a meeting. So at least I was notified, right? And then after the meeting, if you refuse to go at that point, then their rules allow them to disfellowship you in absentia. But they still have to call you and say you've got 7 days to appeal. They didn't do that, so they broke 2 of their rules. And And a third one, because either way, they had to call you and let you know you were disfellowshipped. You should know before anyone else. You shouldn't be told by the guy who cuts your grass. That's ridiculous.
Exactly right. And it was it's funny you say that, because I have spoken to others about it, and they all felt the same, exactly what you've just said, Eric, that they've broken their own rules. These are men who are elders within the organization, who are just quietly doing their own thing, have said the same thing what you've said. And, like the fact that this gardener can text me back a message and I could receive it.
Yeah.
Couldn't they have done that? And just send me a text message just saying, you know what, we've tried to contact you. It's really difficult, whatever. But at least I can read it off the text.
Right. Exactly.
They didn't even try. So to me, it was like, we don't really want to talk to you. We have our own ideas. We believe you're guilty anyway.
That's right.
We're not going to hear your case. But if you don't, I just felt that they are law unto themselves when it comes to these sort of matters. It's got nothing to do with God. No. Because if God was there in the picture, then they would be then subject to his rules, as it were.
Yes.
But where there is evil and where there is something to hide, then God is quietly put outside the picture.
Right. Really, it reflects how terrified they are of anyone who disagrees. They don't want to talk to you. Like in my case, they refuse to even allow me to take my own notes, my paper notes, and my own Bible even. I wasn't allowed to take it. They were going to provide me with a Bible. My witnesses weren't allowed in. They're terrified of any discussion because they have no defense. And yet at the same time, they're completely convinced that you're irredeemable and beyond reasoning, and therefore they don't want to waste time on that. They just want to get rid of you because if they don't do that, if somebody says, well, I noticed Frank is doing videos, and they can't say, oh, well, he's disfellowshipped. If they can't do that, then people are going to say, well, why isn't he disfellowshipped? He should be, right? So they have to follow this path that they're on to silence people. It's the only tool they have, is to silence people, because they can't prove you wrong from the Bible. They know that instinctively. They can't prove you wrong. So their only choice is to get rid of you as best they can, to the extent that their power allows, which is
you're right
now.
Yeah, I think you're right, Eric. It seems that if they were truly following through scripturally, then they wouldn't be bringing Moses back, because all they're trying to do is provide or set up laws and structures that aren't in the scriptures, like for a New Testament believer. And so they have to go back into the grab something out of the book of Moses, and then Moses 3.0 in, and then fuse that with some sort of Christian principle they find. And even that doesn't make sense.
No.
So all this sort of running around by two elders, forming a committee which is not even scriptural. What is it doing? It just shows, like you're saying, to the extent that they want to just silence you, quieten you down. They don't want the congregation discussing matters that really they should be. They should be open to discuss anything. Especially when it comes to their worship to God. That's something that needs to be discussed. I think it's more coming back to silencing, like you're saying, silencing people that are waking up and just having just sensible questions. I think once they get onto that path where they have to silence anybody, I mean, who am I? I'm really a nobody in my mind. But if they have to go to this length to silence someone that's been away for years, what does it tell you?
Exactly. Yeah, it's like the Pharisees that would throw anybody out of the synagogue who accepted and acknowledged the Christ. That was the only tactic they had. They couldn't beat the Christ. They couldn't win out with truth. All they could do was intimidate. But in your case, and I didn't mind, like if someone asks me, "Are you disfellowshipped?" My answer is no. I'm not, because they didn't follow their own rules. And therefore, their whole process is invalid by their own rules. And I even wrote a letter into the governing body just to give me that basis to say, no, I'm not. Not that I care. I have no desire to go back. But if I meet someone, I'm going to talk to them. And the old idea that, I'm disfellowshipped, I can't talk to you, I have to warn you ahead of time, and like a leper crying out, leper, leper. No way, no. If they don't want to talk to me, then it's up to them to take that step and refuse to talk to me, right? Then it's on them. That's the way I look at it. Because when Jesus was talking about the sheep and the goats, what did he do with regard to the sheep? The sheep were those who had a need. It might be they needed food, they needed a drink, they were in prison, they were sick. It was always an act of mercy. And those who did an act of mercy to them, they get everlasting life. And those who didn't do an act of mercy were denied it. But the thing is, I think you need to provide them with the opportunity to take that step. To take the step of saying, okay, I know I've heard you're disfellowship, but that's not for me. You're my friend, I'm going to talk to you. Or to turn their back on you. Either way, now they've taken a decision before God. That's very serious action before God. And maybe they don't even realize just how serious it is. But in that parable, that was the answer. They said, but when, Lord, have we ever not fed you or not given you something to drink or not visited you in prison or not visited you when you were sick? And he said, to the extent you did it to the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me. So this is really a serious issue, but really more serious for them than it is for us.
Yeah, I agree with you, Eric. It's sort of, it throws the ball's back in their court to actually make changes to their policies, because it's nothing to do with scripture. It's all about legal. It's a body of elders with a notepad and legalities that are sent through the governing body and their legal team to establish a precedence and to establish laws, court cases like a kangaroo court. No one knows. It's all secret. The congregation doesn't know exactly what has transpired and why you're in this position. All they get is an announcement from the Kingdom Hall, and then they have to make some sort of conclusion as to why or possible why, and then the gossip starts going through. It's not fair to anybody, really.
No.
Two sides are losing out.
Exactly. Yes. You mentioned a scripture to me about this that had come to mind. Do you have that handy? If not, I can read it for you. But
I was thinking of the scripture in Romans 16, chapter 16, verse 17, where it says there, I'm pretty sure it's Romans 16, 17 by memory. I'm just reading from the New King James Version. It says, now I urge you, brethren, note that those who cause divisions and offences, contrary to doctrine which you learnt, and avoid them. So here's a clear case where the whole congregation would have heard this announced, and they would have thought, okay, so if someone's causing division and offences, contrary to the doctrine, that is the truth that they heard from the apostles, they had a couple of options there. They can either avoid them or, just be careful of them. Yeah. But it doesn't say anything about disfellowshipping them, which in turn means shunning them.
Right.
It's got nothing to do with that at all.
Yes.
So who's following what principle here, or what are they following when they do all this?
Right. When someone, they will read this. I know witnesses will read this, and going from the New World Translation, it talks about those who create divisions and causes for stumbling contrary to the teaching that you have learned. And they would say, well, you see, we've learned many things from the Watchtower, but it's not talking about the Watchtower or about the governing body, but as you said, the teaching they learned from the apostles. So it's the teaching that's found in the scriptures, not from the publications of men. And when they refuse to see that, I like to say, well, listen, let's say this was a Catholic now, right?
Yeah.
And a Catholic is starting to find fault with Catholic doctrine. Would you say that this applies? Oh, no, of course that doesn't apply because that's false teaching, right? Well, I said, well, if it doesn't apply to a Catholic, how can it apply to witnesses? How does it works for one and not for the other? Well, our teachings are true. Oh, are they? Well, in that case, let's talk about them. Oh, no, we can't talk about them because you're an apostate. You see, so there's just no logic to this because Jesus said, I came to create division, and he did, right? So when it's talking about divisions here, it's talking about divisions against the teaching of Christ, not the teaching of men. And that is the point that all witnesses who are, dyed in the wool, so to speak, seem to miss.
Yes, and it's because you're right, and I think that's because the governing body has deliberately shielded them or have protected their own false doctrines by creating an enemy.
Yeah.
And by creating this enemy, which is those within are now your enemies, they don't have to explain much. Or they just have to point the finger at somebody and say, well, they're your enemy, avoid them.
Right.
As opposed to what that scripture's saying is, here's the case. We're like you're saying, this is the teachings from Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Now, examine what they're saying. Is it in line with that or not? And if it's not, then you make that choice.
Right.
So the power is back with the brother and sister to make their own determination what they should do.
That's right.
Not in the hands of a few people. And that's what the mistake has been made all for 100+ years with the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Well, probably, I guess since the 50s, I think, when they brought in the disfellowshipping, where they called it a weapon of darkness.
Right.
1951, they introduced it into the Christian congregation as a weapon of light.
Right.
So they
called it a weapon of darkness, right? And then 5 years later, suddenly, it's a weapon of light.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
So it's you can't be in light and then be in dark. So they've moved away, and they're just shifting their faults. And
right.
This is the way they do it. They're hiding or they're covering over their 75 tragedy, 1914, 35. We can pick out any dates we like, and all they're doing is covering that over because individuals like us and others within who probably aren't on YouTube or making any videos, but they're talking, they're eyeing them out and weeding them out, and then it's just saying, these are your enemies. Not the immoral person, it's these guys.
Right. And the irony is anyone who disagrees with them, especially as you and I do publicly, then we're persecuting them. And this is the funniest thing. It's like in ancient times, Catholics would take someone who was trying to reveal the truth and hang the Bible around their neck and then tie them to a stake and burn them. And imagine saying, we're burning this person because he's persecuting us. Because essentially that's what they're saying. We're shunning this person because he's persecuting us. Isn't that what you call projection? Telling, doing something and then telling that, or saying the other person is the one who's doing the very thing you're doing. Oh my.
Yes.
Yeah.
Poor little us. We got a bank account of maybe $1,000. They're working off $1 billion. Top legal eagles. And we're the ones that are a threat.
Right.
It's a joke. But I think we have to just remember that the processes that they put in place are not from God.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key, is to remember it's the men who have organized this. They're a corporate organization protecting their assets and protecting their reputation within.
Yes.
I think people outside can see it, but within they're just loyal to the core, and they don't really understand why they're loyal. It's, you ask them why you're loyal to it. Well, I'm loyal to God, and God's using them regardless of what's going on. So They've done it.
It's something that's happened recently here in Toronto. I mentioned in a video that they closed down or merged something like 53 congregations. And as a consequence, I've heard stories from different ones that are still in that they have to travel 30, 40 minutes, one and more than an hour extra each way to get to the hall now because the other hall is no longer being used. And this happened the first Sunday of March, so it just happened. And driving by two different Kingdom halls on a Sunday, the parking lots were packed. I mean, double and even triple parked. There wasn't enough parking because they had brought so many people together from like three congregations so that they were getting figures of like 160 members in each congregation. That's what the merge did. So you imagine you've driven an extra 30 or 40 minutes in the wintertime to get to a parking lot where there's no parking because there's too many cars. And then you get into a hall where there's no seats because there's too many people. And the brothers must be thinking, this is madness. This makes no sense. What's the benefit of this? And yet they'll still say, well, it's Jehovah's arrangement. We have to be humble. So they have managed to very effectively take the critical thinking out of the brain of all these brothers and make them into just manageable sheep. And that's not the kind of sheep that Jesus was looking for. Or I think the other term is sheeple. So whereas a Christian is not that way. He's a sheep, yes, because he follows the Christ. And that gives him freedom, and it gives him power, and it gives him the ability to examine all things because he's a spiritual person. But the physical man, he can't examine anything. And that's what they've done. They've turned Christians into physical men. It's an abomination. My apologies for the abrupt end to that conversation. We ran into a technical difficulty. Frank's end of the discussion froze. We had covered pretty much everything we wanted to say in any case. Frank is in Australia, I'm in Canada, so being at opposite sides of the globe, I guess it's not totally unexpected that there would be technical issues from time to time. In any case, we covered the basis, and I think we exposed the hypocrisy of the judicial system in a very practical way. If you'd like to learn more about Frank and his work, you can follow his channel. I'll put a link to it at the end of this video. And if you'd like to follow more of our videos on Beroean Pickets, please subscribe and you'll be notified as more come online. Thank you very much. My name's Eric Wilson, also known as Milady Vivlon. Until the next time.